Welcome to the Tech Blog Writer Podcast, your guide to future tech trends and innovation in a language you understand. Now, over to your host, Neil Hughes.
Welcome back to another episode of the Tech Blog Writer Podcast. Today, I wanted to talk about the subject of innovation. Yep, sure, it's a buzzword. We've all seen many companies go after it and get it completely wrong and end up giving up or going back to the way they've always done things before. So I wanted to find out more about how to successfully implement an innovation culture within a company and how others are doing it. So when I came across DeveloperTown, who are a consulting firm specialising in launching new software products for large and small companies. And essentially DeveloperTown designs, develops and delivers software to help innovative leaders solve real business problems. But I don't want to reveal too much. This is one of those I think we should just dive straight in. So buckle up, hold on tight, so I can beam your ears all the way to Indianapolis in Indiana, so we can speak with Michael D. Kelly from DeveloperTown. So a massive warm welcome to the show. Can you tell the listeners a little about who you are and what you do?
My name is Michael Kelly. I'm the managing partner at a company called DeveloperTown, which is located in Indianapolis, Indiana. We're a little bit interesting and have a little bit of an interesting background as a company because we do a lot of things. So we are first and foremost a consulting company that works with large enterprise companies to help them build and launch new products in the market. I'll talk a little bit about that. And then we also run a startup incubator called DeveloperTown Starts, which works with early stage companies on an equity basis to help them build and launch companies. And then sometimes we put our money where our mouth is and we launch our own startups. And I play a role in all of those.
So when it comes to the word innovation, I think it's scattered right across that corporate landscape. And everyone wants to do it. Very often a lot of people do it very badly and give up halfway through. But I believe that at DeveloperTown, you work with corporate innovators to explore software solutions that essentially support their core business needs. But just to set the scene, can you help listeners visualise what problems you solve with DeveloperTown and also what makes you guys unique in what you do?
We started in 2010 with an initial idea that we would be a consulting company that focused entirely on startups. And we would do work for a mix of cash and equity with those startups. And we did that. And I would say we ran it somewhat successfully for the first couple of years. And we grew every year. But by the end of the second year, we kind of looked back at the business and we realized that while we were running a nice little consulting business, it wasn't the business that we thought it would be. And the big reason for that is we were living paycheck to paycheck, because I don't know if you know this, not all startups can pay their bills. And so when you have a business theory that says we're going to cover our costs with our consulting rates and then take profits and take those in equity, and with the idea that we'll put our money where our mouth is and all the upside will come from the equity that we gain. When the few companies that you have don't even pay their hard costs, it makes it hard for you to make payroll. So in 2012, 2013, we took a hard look at the business and we said, look, we can't keep doing things the way that we're doing, even though we're passionate about startups. We need to find a more viable business. And so we started working with large companies under the theory that large companies need to build and launch new products, go after new market opportunities, just like startups do. And in a lot of cases, we felt that they were also being underserved by the market in general. So 2013, we kind of made that pivot with this idea that we would kind of go 50-50 startups and large companies and start working with large companies. So going back to your questions, I think one of the things that makes us unique in the way that we approach the larger companies that we work with and the way that we help them think of going to market with a product is that we treat them just like we treat our startups. And I mean that in every way. They attend all the same meetings. It's largely the same process. Even though we do it at a slightly different scale with our larger companies, we take all the lessons that we've learned from doing this with our startup clients and applying it with them. And that includes all the market research before you write a line of code and understanding who your customers are and developing real compelling user experiences in the software. And so that approach, which I think to most of our clients feels very different from what they feel from most corporate consulting firms, is one big difference in how we innovate alongside them. And then I think the second thing that is a little bit unique about us is where we typically come into the organization. Very rarely Are we brought in on an RFP where the business has identified a specific product that they want to build, and they've written the 200-page requirements document for what that's going to look like, and they're handing that out to 15 vendors to have everybody compete with quotes? That's not going to be a good fit for us for a couple of reasons. Some of those are our baggage, some of those theirs. We're going to be the more exploratory team, where you say as a business, look, there's clearly an opportunity over here or a challenge over here in this segment of our business. And we as a business can clearly identify that opportunity. Like, we know we need to invest more in Internet of Things, or we know we need to invest more in this underserved customer segment that we've kind of been ignoring for a couple of years, or we see this threat to our business based on new technology or new regulatory practices that are happening. But even though we recognize that opportunity or threat, we're not 100% sure what to do with that. That's going to be a perfect opportunity for us, because then we can step in alongside the corporate client and say, okay, we have a set of practices, this whole lean startup methodology and agile software development practices that is, it's not new anymore, but is still a relatively innovative way of thinking about how you approach a marketplace. And instead of saying we're going to define the answer up front and then go build it, we're going to slowly let that answer emerge from the feedback that we get from clients and prospects and sales and the small experiments that we run along the way. And we'll build a system that builds the smallest responsible product that we can, ships it, gets feedback, whatever the form of that feedback is, whether it's surveys or contracts or data from the field by looking at analytics. And then we'll now iterate the product again and do that again. And we'll do that across sales, marketing, technology, everything it takes to really understand that business opportunity.
Now, I was just going to say, you mentioned a few moments ago there about splitting your clients, 50% corporate, 50% startups. And I wanted to take you back in time and ask if you could tell me a little bit more about your backstory and the evolution of DeveloperTown there. I mean, what I should say is, what was the original inspiration? And also, have you had to pivot along the way as you've found your biggest strengths as you move forward?
Yes. So originally, the idea was, we saw our very first tagline, I think, this is a little bit from memory, was let us be your technical co-founder. And the original impetus for the idea of DeveloperTown was, all the founders had come from startup space, all from different approaches. Some of us on the venture capital side, some of us as founders, some of us as developers, all different aspects of it. But that we all experienced the same problem, which was, if you were working on a startup in the early 2000s, you saw a company build a product out of duct tape and coat hangers, leverage that early market traction to raise a bunch of venture capital, and basically tell the venture capitalists that they were raising the money from, you're giving me this $5 million so I can scale the business. Find out that the actual product behind the scenes can't scale, and so they spend half of that money that was supposed to be growth capital on rebuilding the product from the ground up. And in 2010, we saw an opportunity that, with relatively new technologies and frameworks that were hitting the market at the time, that you could build software in a fundamentally different way, where you could not take as many shortcuts and have scalable software from day one. And so our theory was, we're going to be the team that you would bring in early on to help you build with the right set of technologies and software practices and tools from day one, so that when you do raise your venture capital, you don't have to rewrite the software from the ground up. So that was that kind of the original DeveloperTown vision. And again, we would do that with early stage companies. When that first pivot, which happened in about 2012, 2013, was a financial pivot, that's where we identified that we probably couldn't find enough well-paying startups to do this work, and that's where we kind of split to this idea of, we would do corporate innovation. And I'll take you down the rest of that path. So that idea of 50-50 corporate work versus startup work turned into, like any good company, we started following the revenue. So that became 60-40, 70-30, 80-20. And in 2015, we kind of looked back at the business, and if you looked at our P&L in 2015, you would see that 95% of the work that we were doing from a revenue perspective was with corporate clients. And so in 2015, we looked at that and said, this is not really the business we set out to launch. While we're doing super interesting work and we are building solid technology that scales, like, we are fulfilling that side of our initial value prop and what we wanted to do, it wasn't really with the customers that we had originally set out to do it. And it wasn't with this idea of we're going to put our money where our mouth is and make bets in the technology that we're building. And so in 2015, that's when we decided, you know what, we're going to keep doing the corporate innovation work because it is super exciting. We learn a lot doing it and we have great customers, but we're also going to spin up a separate company called DeveloperTown Starts, which is an incubator where we work with 4 to 6 companies a year on a 100% equity basis. This idea being that we can do both, but they probably need to be treated different, funded different, and managed different. So that was kind of the first pivot, or maybe the second pivot along the way. Then the other thing that I would tell you, when we launched in 2010, we were all a bunch of developers. We had one full-time designer on the team, and even he could write some code. So the really early focus of DeveloperTown was, and as the name would imply, software development. And in about 2012, we had another experience from the market where we had released a couple of products, and we, of course, were all super excited about them because we want to see our clients be successful. And I think we were at a local event, and Mike and I, Mike's one of the co-founders. We were like, hey, we just launched these products, and the people who were there were like, yeah, we know DeveloperTown did those. And we're like, well, wait, how did you know we did those? And their answer was, well, they look just like all the other DeveloperTown products, which I don't know if you know this. That's not a good thing to hear. That's not exactly heartwarming when you think of software products. And so that was kind of a wake-up call for us. In 2012, we got serious about software design, usability, and visual design. So we brought in a new partner to the firm, Randy Fisher, who took us from 1 developer up to like some obscene number, like 12 or 13 developers. And we're a small firm. So like at one point, it was like 50-50 design and development. But it's exactly what we needed because it was a huge culture change for us, completely changed the way that we thought about approaching problems and really putting, that user experience first. In the next couple of years, we ended up winning like Best Mobile Design or Mobile Design Finalist at South by Southwest and some other great design accolades from our team, which was awesome, and really changed the way that we engaged with our clients and thought about building product. Then again, in about 2 years after that, in 2014, we had another couple of events happen at the end of the year where we had launched a couple of products that were, I will tell you still to this day, some of the best products I think we ever built. Killer user experiences, software that would scale. I mean, we were killing the competition. One of them was a statistical engine, and it was way more accurate as a predictive engine than some of the competitors in the market. And we had that product and a couple of others just fail completely in the marketplace. Like we built these great products and nobody ever saw them. And at this time, our pitch was still, we're your technical co-founder. And the idea behind that was we're going to design, develop, build product, but everything else in the business is on you. Your marketing, your sales, your legal, your finance, your everything else it takes to build and run a business. And in 2014, it became apparent to us that the idea that marketing a product could be separate from product development was just broken, that those two really need to be tightly coupled and integrated. And you need to have a strategy for going to market that starts when you first start talking to customers about user experience and evolves over the life cycle of the project. So in 2014, we decided to add a marketing function to the team. We brought on another partner, Nick Wengler, who had been running his own firm before that, and he helped us build out that practice. So today, we've kind of evolved to our pitches, let us help you design, build, and launch being the marketing piece, a new product into the market. And it's really the way that those three practices interact across one another that builds a compelling story about how you take a product to market.
Fantastic. I love that. I mean, the startup life is infamously called a roller coaster ride of those tremendous highs and tremendous lows there. And what kind of experiences have you had with your own startups at DeveloperTown along the way during this startup journey? Yeah,
so we have a couple of times now decided that there's an opportunity that we wanted to pursue ourselves. And maybe I'll just share a couple of those. So I think one of our most successful ventures to date is a product called Tenant Tracker. And it's a commercial real estate software company that provides SaaS. It provides a SaaS solution for property owners, so people who own skyscrapers, people who own malls. Typically, it's going to be a large use facility who need to turn spaces faster so they can collect rent sooner. So if you have a mall and you've got 200 spaces in that mall if you're looking at like 10%-ish vacancy on any given year, if your average time to turn that space is 3 months, meaning the Abercrombie and Fitch moves out, you now need to get it ready for the Gap who wants to move in. If it takes you 90 days to do that, that's 90 days you're not collecting rent. Much less if you go past that 90 days, if you contractually said you'd have it done in 90 days and you go past that, you might also be paying penalties on top of not collecting rent. So in certain cases, this can be really high dollar stuff. We built a solution that basically says, look, let's not just make sure you hit the 90 days that you committed to. Let's see if we can make that 90 days, 60 days, or 45 days, or actually shorten that window so you can collect more rent for the space that you already have. So that's Tenant Tracker. We, in 2013, 2014, we had a partner of ours, a company called NOI Strategies out of Chicago, came to us with one of their clients, and their client basically said, look, we want to build, it was a small consulting firm in Chicago that said, we want to build custom software to do this. Because we do this kind of consulting work for our clients, and we really feel, and for years we've used Excel to do it, but we feel like there's got to be a better way, especially for distributed teams, and our work is global, and like there just has to be a solution out there. So NOI Strategies, whose business is to do real estate software and consulting, and that's all they ever do, they looked across the market and said, nope, there's nothing out there that does that. Meet DeveloperTown. DeveloperTown can help you build a custom solution that can do this. We went in there and talked to them and said, there's no way, like you're like a 20-person firm to build a custom software solution to do this. You're talking about a whole product. You can't afford to build a custom solution like this for one company and maintain it and grow it and all the things that you have to do with software. Like, it just makes no financial sense. And they heard that message and they were fine with it. And they agreed when we became transparent on what it would cost to build it. And then we just kind of walked away. 6 months later, they came back and said, no, we have to figure this out. We truly view this as a strategic differentiator. We really need the software to run our business. We know other people need it too. We have to be able to figure something out. So we ended up doing a joint venture with them and NOI Strategies and us. And we basically launched this product called Tenant Tracker, where we said, look, great, you're going to be our first user. We'll build it for you. And then we're slowly going to onboard other users who are going to pay SaaS licensing. We'll do it. We'll build it at risk with you as our first customer, and we'll make it work. After about 12 months, we ended up buying out our partners. So we could just kind of drive it forward ourselves using our process. And now it's a standalone company with, I think, 4 full-time employees. Trying to do this real time off the top of my head, 4 full-time employees. We've raised some outside money. Great traction in the market. We have some awesome customers, from our early adopters to the folks who've just signed up recently. And it's growing and scaling. And some of the interesting things that have come out of that experience that we then translate into our other experience on all of our other projects are things like, when we approach, even with our corporate clients, when we approach a new project, we try to recreate that same sense of skepticism, right? Which is our job early on is to talk ourselves out of doing a project. And that's the complete opposite of what most people do, right? Most people are like, I need to convince others that this is a good idea. I need to convince myself this is a good idea. I need to find all the reasons that confirm why this is the right thing to take to market. And in that example, right, we immediately stepped up and said, you have absolutely no business doing this. It's way too cost prohibitive for a 20-person team to build, scalable SaaS software. And we ended up, killing the idea early on. And then even when they came back, a little bit more detail, we also said, look, let's go find a couple of early clients who are willing to commit, whether it's through a letter of intent or sign an actual contract, that if they build it, they'll also be willing to pay for it, because it's still not good enough that you think this needs to exist. We need to find other people in the market who also think this exists. And we do that all day long now, where in B2B products, we're looking at pre-purchase intent. So whether that's letters of intent or signing contracts that have delivery clauses baked into them for those first early customers, just to prove that it's not a theory in your head that people want to buy it, but you actually got somebody willing to write a check and put their money where their mouth is. And on the consumer side, when you look at that same thing, maybe you can't get somebody to write a check for a mass market product, but you could do something similar. Like, what if you set up a marketing site, like a simple Squarespace site? Over a week, you drove a couple thousand users to that Squarespace site for a product that doesn't exist yet. You've never written it. All you've put on this marketing site are some screenshots. But at the bottom of the page, you have the click here to download from Apple or click here to download from Google. And all you're trying to measure is, if I can land people there at a certain cost of customer acquisition, and they're willing to click download, you're guessing, but let's say for a mass market product, you assume that that's a proximity for a purchase intent. That when they click download, you're going to count that as a purchase. You can start to get before you even write a line of code, you can start to get an idea of what's my real cost of customer acquisition, what are the conversion numbers I think I'd be looking at early on without any optimization, for the value props and the pricing or whatever it is to get people to download. You can also factor in some loss of, well, just because they downloaded it doesn't mean they're going to subscribe and do all those things, but it at least gives you an early look before you spend a bunch of money building product as to whether or not you really have an idea that's going to have traction in the market.
What a fantastic story. Those original clients that asked you to design this software, are they still actually using it as well?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. They're one of our strongest advocates in the market. They're fantastic. We win because they're a consulting company. Every time they go into a new client, they also get to bring us along for the ride and introduce us to that client. So it's been a great partnership. And I'd like to say we still have our early corporate, kind of independent corporate clients. Our earliest adopters are all still with us as well, which has been fantastic.
So we are living in the age of instant gratification now, and a lot of people seem to feel if they don't get immediate success, they give up. But I read a great antidote to this, and it was a blog post written by yourself where you wrote on the importance of persistence. And this really, really resonated with me because we all see things that we'd like to change. We all wish things were different, and we often hit that wall on a specific project, team, or relationship. And we all get to that point where we feel like quitting. But can you tell the listeners about that post and some of those tips that you found helpful yourself there?
Yeah, so it's an interesting post because it comes from a lifetime of me quitting, which is a little ironic. In my career, I did independent consulting. So straight out of college, I worked in my first consulting company with a couple of other guys from college. We did that to kind of pay our way through school. And then when we graduated, we broke up the band and they went and got more traditional jobs. And I was just in love with consulting. So I ended up doing that for many years to come. And one of the things that's interesting about consulting, especially the type of consulting that I was doing, where my goal was to have more than one client at a time. So I wouldn't go on site somewhere for 40 hours a week. An ideal client for me was going to be like 20 or 30 hours a week, maybe even 10 hours a week. And then I could do a lot of that work remote. They could be anywhere in the country. And I could juggle multiple clients at one time. And that was just a dream job to me, because not only did it mean I only had to do work that I was really well suited for and excited about, but anytime the going got tough, I could just walk away. So like, let's say you and I are working on a project together and we just don't get along because we have different, whether backgrounds culturally or philosophically, we view things differently. Well, after a 3-month gig, I could basically say, well, look, good luck, Neil, and I wish you the best, and I'm going to move on to my next thing. And it was never an awkward conversation, right? Like, so it just made it super easy to be a quitter. And so for about 10 years, I was a quitter. And, software, think as a software developer in the early 2000s, like, just stupid amount of opportunity, right? So it's not like I ever was really worried about my ability to get my next gig or, whatever that was. And it was also partly because that's just, I like to think I had a skill set that was in demand. And, I thought really hard about the business of being a consultant as well. So fast forward to 2010, we're launching DeveloperTown. And up until this point, my longest job ever was 2 years at Liberty Mutual, which turned out to be an awesome experience. Liberty Mutual was my first frontline management job. It was my first management experience. I went there and worked under a wonderful person called Julie DeSutter. She's now one of my partners at DeveloperTown. She's amazing. She's totally transformed our business. And when I worked with Julie at Liberty, I specifically went there to work with her because I knew I needed to learn how to lead teams and manage people. And Julie was my first dose of reality of like, sometimes things are hard and you have to figure it out. Like you can't just walk away, especially if it's your team and you're responsible for them, right? Like their problems become your problems. And now you're not just fighting your own battles, but you sometimes have to stick up for your team and make sure that they're protected and that they have what they need to be successful. And it was a great experience for me, not only because Liberty was a good employer and invested a lot in me as a first-time manager, but that time with Julie, like if there's anything about Julie that I think most of us here at DeveloperTown would agree with, it's just persistence, right? Like she is the person when you set a goal or set a target, she's going to be the one who's going to find a way and push not just herself, but the entire team to hit that goal, which is it's an amazing thing when you see it done well. And so that was kind of my first experience there. And then before that, so that was 2 years at Liberty. Before that, my longest job was probably 6 months. So completely conflict averse. So when we were launching the business in 2010, faced for the first time this idea that like, no, this is your company now, right? Like you're one of the founders of this business. You're not just going to walk away because it got hard. And to make it more interesting, it's not like I founded the company. There were 5 of us originally. So it's also a partnership. And so it's not like you can just make a decision and go forward with that decision. You have to somewhat lead by consensus, right? Like you need your partners to buy into that and agree with it and push things forward. And so now it's not just you, but it's a whole team of people that need to be aligned. And again, to make it even more complicated, it's not just your things that you need to fight for. If you want a partnership of that size to run well, you also need to stick your nose in other disagreements if those 2 partners can't resolve it, and you need to be the peacemaker to make sure that it gets sorted out. Because if you just let that stuff sit and fester, that's the kind of stuff that tears partnerships apart. 2010, when we did this, I really started to get my first dose of reality of what conflict looks like. And I sucked at it. Like I was the worst. I remember yelling and screaming like a little baby, like seriously yelling at my partners in meeting rooms because I'd never fought with somebody before professionally. Like I'd just never done it. Like I either never cared enough because I knew I'd only be there for 3 months, or I just didn't have any reps. Like I had no practice doing it. And I was just a kid, and I knew it. Like, it's not like I was in the room and like wasn't aware that I was being a baby. Like I was in the room being a baby and I couldn't stop it. Like I didn't have a better model for interacting with people that I could reliably call up and deal with the conflict that I was dealing with. So I tried to get really serious for a couple of years on how do I be a better partner? How do I be a better leader? How do I be more emotionally intelligent to the people around me and maybe stretch some muscles that I've never had before? And in the blog post, I tried to talk a little bit about that journey and some of the things that were helpful to me. One of them is I have become a massive fan of Stoic philosophy. And there's some super easy reads to get in there, like Gates of Fire. It's a fiction book with a lot of nonfiction kind of baked into it. And it's about the, Spartans and the Battle of Thermopylae and all that kind of stuff. And there's a lot of philosophy kind of baked into that in a super fun way. All the way to like Seneca's on the shortness of life. And Stoic philosophy in the business context, not a new thing. Tim Ferriss spends a ton of time on it. And there's tons of people out there that do. Ryan Holiday, probably one of the best modern business writers on Stoic philosophy out there. And, with the obstacle is the way and ego is the enemy and that kind of stuff. So all that has been super helpful for me to create a model in my head for how do I better deal with conflict in my life and control my reaction to it, to finding little cheesy ways to practice persistence in some different ways. So like one of the things that I've gotten into over the last few years is Japanese martial arts. I started with Aikido a few years ago and have since started to do some sword work and judo and some of the other Japanese martial arts. There's a very interesting thing that has come out of that for me with persistence, both in like anytime you're trying to do something new that is physically demanding, it is like crazy frustrating, right? Like think of any sport, any kind of deeply technical skill. It's so easy to see somebody do it who's been doing it for 20 years. And, it's just so easy for them. And you're the schlub off the street who's got 6 months of practice behind you. And you like can't even, like you're tripping over your own feet, right? It's so demotivating. So I forced myself there to make the promise that, to myself that like, I'm going to gut this out. Like I'm actually excited about Aikido and I'm excited about Japanese martial arts, but I know that if I give myself permission to quit, I'm a quitter, right? So I made myself the promise that if I can get to a black belt, I will then give myself permission to quit, kind of knowing full well that once you get to black belt, you're not going to quit. Like, at that point, you're pretty much in anyway. But forcing myself to wake up every morning at 5 a.m., go to the dojo, get time on the mat, and grind through that experience just because I knew it was good for me to grind through that experience. Like there's learning in there that I can apply to other parts of my life. And it's totally been true. Not only has that experience of gutting that out given me new ways to find, mental reserves to figure things out and get over it, but also just the practice of, Aikido is very much centered on the other person. Just the practice of that martial art has also helped me with perspective and having better experience with other people and things like that. So those are a couple of things from the blog post. I'm happy to keep ranting on that, or we could move on to something else.
Now, when it comes to challenges in the business world, are you finding that legacy systems are one of the biggest challenges facing businesses at the moment? And also, are there any other challenges that you're really seeing out there?
Yeah, for sure. So when we look at almost all of our larger corporate clients, when we look at the big challenges that they have, it's access to the data that they already have, right? Which in many cases means legacy systems. How do you get the data out of those systems, get it into a usable format, make meaning out of that data, which is a massive problem that, there's tons of investment going into, but that doesn't mean it's easy. And so that is a huge issue. Another huge issue that kind of comes out of that is very adjacent to that legacy system problem and lack of insight into the data is really knowing who your customer is, what their preferences are, and how to build a highly customized consumer grade experience for your own employees, which is just an expectation, right? So when you think of your expectations for when your company that you work for rolls out a new HR system or a new timekeeping system or a new rewards tracking system or anything, your expectations have been so ruined by Google and Apple and Microsoft, maybe not Microsoft, but by Google and Apple for sure, that you just have this expectation that not only is it going to be so easy to use that you'll never need to read an instruction manual because user experience is king, right? Yeah. But also that it's going to be hand-tailored to you and who you are and who your preferences are, right? Individualization has become such a commonplace thing in our experience today that you expect it in your workplace as well. And it's an unbelievable hurdle for a traditional company to overcome when they think about how do we better manage our workforce and talent, and how do we provide them with the tools that they need to be successful, and how do we do that on top of legacy systems when we don't even have a complete picture of who our user is because we didn't build the software a year ago like Apple did. We built it 20 years ago. And so I think that's like the next adjacent piece to that is there's such a high level of expectation from the users of product, whether they're inside your company or outside your company, that it's the next piece of how do you deliver on that promise. And then I think the third piece is, and I'm sure every generation since the beginning of time, just like we all think the generation after us is lazier than we were, the same is also true, that every generation thinks that things move faster today than they have ever moved in the past in terms of information and innovation and technology. And while it's probably true, it's just not a unique problem, I guess is the only thing I'm trying to say there. But then the next problem is, of course, that everything is changing so fast that how, as a large company, if you think of the Fortune 500 companies out there in the world, how do they move fast enough to keep up with a competitor that can literally have market share inside of 12 months? When, in the days of manufacturing and logistics and, selling through retailers and wholesalers, when you think of all of these things that used to exist that would slow things down or be natural barriers to entry, that those don't exist anymore, or they certainly don't exist in the same way, right? Like it's just a dramatically different world that we live in, and the pace is so much different. So when you're trying to move a Titanic and you need to do it nimbly and agilely, how do you do that in a way that still keeps a long-term roadmap in mind? And you're not just responding to things, but you actually have a vision for where you're going and how you can be strategic in that. I think that's another challenge. And that gets into more the opportunities and threats that we talked about earlier, where as you're trying to develop that strategy for how you capitalize on an opportunity or how you handle a new threat that has just entered the market, what are the ways that you do that? And again, you still have to do that on top of high customer expectations and employee expectations and legacy systems and data that you can't get full insight into.
Now, you mentioned opportunities and threats there. So I've got to ask, what opportunities are there in the corporate innovation space, do you think, at the moment? And how can businesses actually turn them into a competitive advantage?
Yeah, so quick disclaimer, your mileage may vary. We've only worked in a handful of industries. We're by far and away not like, we're not McKinsey or Accenture or Deloitte. Like we're not those guys. But that being said, I think where we've seen success, there's a couple of trends that we've seen. One is thinking about the intelligence that your workforce has in a fundamentally different way, and trying to get that intelligence out of your employees' heads and into some software solution that can better manage it as a hive mind, right? So some quick examples of that to make that tangible. We've worked with teams that sell through, like they have salespeople out in the market, going different places, selling a product. One of the things that we were able to identify early on with a client when they thought of, so we had a prospect come to us and say, I want to build a sales app for my salespeople who are out in the market. And we said, great, we can help you do that. Why do you think you need a sales app? And their answer was, well, because everybody else has one. This is not a good reason to build an app, by the way, because everybody else has one. So we poked at that a little bit more and we said, well, okay. Maybe we could still help you, but like, is there a compelling reason? Like, is there a specific pain point that you're feeling? Is there something like, let's get to the next level of, why, right? Like, let's ask why 7 times. And ultimately, they didn't have necessarily a great answer for that. So we were lucky enough that they engaged us to go see if we could find a better answer, right? So we came in with a very short project to basically say, look, we're going to go out in the field with some of your people, really understand what they do, and come up with maybe a better value prop for maybe why we should do something. And if we can't, then maybe you don't need an app. Maybe you're just fine the way that you are. And so we did that. And what we came back with was this incredible intelligence that they found that their reps out on the road knew the specific profiles of every single one of their customers, and they had thousands of customers, so good that they could potentially start selling whole new products or information services to the people they were distributing for in a way that they never thought. So here's a quick example of that. So let's say I know I'm selling products out in the market, and let's say I know which of my customers are going to be early adopters of new technology. So if I service 300 customers on average, and I know these 50, whenever I have a new technology, I can go to these 50 and they're almost guaranteed to buy. And then these next 50 are maybes. And then these 200 are just not even going to look at it. I have that in my head as a sales rep. I know who those people are because I've been working for your company for the last, 5 to 10 years. But you don't know who they are. And because you don't know who they are as the company, it means you can't go tailor a custom service or offering to your manufacturers or to your clients to say, look, what if we offered a early adopter track where we're going to upsell, we'll charge more for the service, but we're going to guarantee that we're going to put your product in front of the, 100 most eager adopters who can give you early feedback and, do private betas and all that kind of stuff. Like, what if you had the intelligence to do that? And that was the kind of stuff that we found when we went out there working with them, that like they had all this amazing knowledge in their workforce, but the business had no way to make sense of it or capitalize on it or create new products and offerings for it. So that's like a good example of, trying to identify an opportunity for how you can be a lot more strategic with what you have and what an employee-facing app might look like. And then there's another really good example of that from an airline that we worked with, where, as you can imagine, airlines have flight crews and pilots who are traveling all over the country, tons of real-time demands, weather demands. Like you can only imagine trying to swap a flight if you get sick. Like, how do you find somebody to sub for you? What if you spill something on your uniform? How do you get a new uniform? I mean, you're talking about an incredibly transient workforce. It's really hard to manage the logistics of just people at scale when you're all over the country like that. And not just all over the country, but moving real time around the country. And so they are a great example of legacy systems. If you can imagine the software that airlines run on and how horrific that might be, you're probably thinking of it correctly. And how do you take an industry that is that old and established with those legacy systems and historically not necessarily friendly relationships between union members and corporate, back office people who are trying to, communicate back and forth with one another, and how do you create a better experience? And so we had a local airline come to us and say, could you help us create a much, much more compelling user-friendly experience for our flight crews and pilots for 2 reasons. One, we would like them to recognize that we want to make an investment in them and in the relationship. We want them to know that we care about their quality of work life and and that we want to be an employer of choice. And then number two, we actually also think that if we get better at these things, we can drive cost out of the business and be more efficient as an airline, and get a real hard dollar ROI on these things over time. Because if we can streamline these processes, like we'll just win as a business. So we work with them to build totally killer user experience. We had 90-something% voluntary user adoption across all flight crews and pilots within the first 60 to 90 days of rolling this out. And it's now used everywhere within the company to tremendous effect. And we're seeing both of those things happen. One is those flight crew members and pilots have come back and said, I can't believe it. This is a night and day difference with how I interact with the company. I truly do feel valued and listened to. We built a customer panel or customer advisory board of pilots and flight crew members who have a say in what features go out in every release, and they get to give us feedback on design, and they feel like they're involved in the process. And on the business side, they're recognizing real returns by automating these processes that were previously manual. So it's another example of reaching into your relationship with your workforce and trying to leverage technology to better that.
Fantastic. Now, as we reach the end of 2017 and start to have one eye on next year and 2018, what will next year have in store for both yourself and DeveloperTown? Is there any big things that you're going to be focusing on that you can share with us today?
It's a good question. So I think on the DeveloperTown side, we're still trying to figure out the right way to engage early on in that innovation process. So here's an example of what that tension looks like for us. So there's a couple of ways we can engage with a client. One is when the client comes in and says, I want to build a thing, and I kind of know what that thing is, but I think you guys could help us make a better version of that thing using your process, right? That's kind of what I talked about before, and we love those projects. That we'll take them all day long. That's great. We know we can hit home runs there. Yeah. But there's this more nebulous way to engage, which is a client shows up and they say, look, we know our industry really well, but we don't know technology that well. And what we'd like to do is find a way to take our industry expertise and your technology expertise and run a session where maybe collaboratively together, we could identify opportunities for new products and go after these things. That's a much more interesting thing, right? Because you have to have the deep subject matter expertise in the industry and the constraints and the regulations and competitors and all that. That stuff matters when you're trying to think of new business opportunities. And then us with the art of what's possible, layering that in. I think it's a relatively new thing for us. We've done it a handful of times and we've had good luck with it, but it's probably not a rinse and repeat process for us yet. And I think in 2018, that's absolutely something that we're focused on growing as a practice and formalizing and getting better at that kind of taking the art of what's possible, layering that into your business expertise and putting together a collaborative team that can figure some of that stuff out. So I think that's something we're excited about. We're also obviously still looking to grow, which for us, we think means geographic growth. We found that 70% of our work tends to happen close to home, which for us kind of means driving distance from Indianapolis. So if you look at a lot of our corporate clients, they are relatively local. And as we look to continue to grow, we think that means we have to open up a couple of new locals. So we're starting to look at other markets that maybe we could, geographic markets that maybe we could expand into with a physical presence to not just help us grow in terms of the number of clients that we can serve, but also from a talent perspective, right? We're under the same crunch that every technology company is here in the States, which is how do you get closer to the right colleges that are throwing off the right talent that, can create the right experience for what it is you're looking for. So we've been thinking a lot about that as well for 2018, what that looks like.
Now, if there is anyone listening that wants to find out more about what we've been talking about today, or even ask you a few questions, can you just remind the listener of your website details and also how they can contact a member of your team?
Yeah, you can find us at DeveloperTown.com. And we're also on all the social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, all those things. So we'll just be at DeveloperTown on any of those. And then if anybody would like to reach out to me, I'm crazy enough to give my email address, mike.kelly@developertown.com. Happy to answer any questions or put you in touch with somebody here who might be better suited if I'm not.
Well, I hope you don't live to regret putting your email address out for the whole world to find.
I think it's on the website anyway, so it's okay.
Well, a huge thanks for coming on and sharing your story today. It seems like you've come such a long way from when you first started and let us be your co-founder to this world now that's changing incredibly fast, and that you're now, you're involved with build, design, and launch. It's fantastic. So a big thank you for coming on and taking that time to share your story today. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me.
A big thank you to Mike Kelly for coming on today. And it seems that most big companies now are on a quest for innovation, but it's so much more than just a buzzword. And Mike really highlighted the level of detail behind the magic there for me. So when it comes to corporate innovation work, such as trends, opportunities and challenges, I think he covered it all there. But it was also great to hear his experience with startups and how corporate innovators are now working with them to explore software solutions to support their core business needs. Because all too often we've seen companies go after shiny technological solutions that solve problems that don't exist. And it should always be about solving the problem first before even thinking about software or technology. And for that alone, I applaud Mike and everything that he's doing there with DeveloperTown. But what are your thoughts? What challenges and opportunities have you seen in this space? I'd love to hear your insights, so please feel free to send me an email at techblogwriter@outlook.com or tweet me at Neil C. Hughes. And remember, if you want a personalised Christmas card from yours truly, pop me a message and I'll get one of those out to you as well, no matter where you are located in the world. It will brighten up my office during the holiday season. But I'm afraid that's it for today's episode, so a big thank you for listening, and until next time, don't be a stranger.
Thanks for listening to the Tech Blog Writer Podcast. Until next time, remember, technology is best when it brings people together.